Hi everyone, I am Raphael Côté. I am a second year Law and Civilization student at the Champlain College of St. Lambert, which is located near Montreal in Quebec, Canada. And I am a member of the multicultural crew of my college. I'm also a founding member of the Black Lives Allyship Mission Initiative, which kind of rose up after the event of the BLM events, which occurred in the last year or so. And our mission really is to create a safe space for students with the goal of celebrating the cultural diversity that exists within the Champlain College community. So what we're doing is we're organizing a lot of events. We're just trying to make sure that people know that we're here just to celebrate this kind of diversity that we have within that community. And one of the ways we do so is by doing interviews and by doing discussions. Most notably, last year we spoke to Jagmeet Singh, the current NDP leader, to talk about issues of race and discrimination, especially with his own experience in politics. So yeah, and I'm glad to be here with you today, and I think this is going to be a very good conversation.
Yeah, I can feel my racism towards the Quebecy people melting away with every word exchanged. No, it's a delight to speak with you. So, what do you have on your mind, apart, of course, from your impressive list of qualifications and immediate associations?
Well, I would say that what I'm trying to do is to kind of create an environment in which people feel like they can engage themselves more within, any kind of social issue that exists, whether it be, race, for example, or LGBTQ rights or amnesty, anything of that sort. I think, Gen Z is going to be a key generation in kind of spreading awareness for these specific causes. But I think that, in a lot of, either mainstream media or media that's kind of more leaning towards the right, these activists, these so-called activists, are kind of portrayed in a way that's more pejorative. So I'm trying to see if there's anything we can do to kind of, I would say, it's kind of bad wording for it, but essentially, bringing glory back to the term of social justice warrior. I mean, the term itself is very pejorative, but just,
Yeah.
the notion of being an activist itself nowadays is seen as, kind of negative. So I want to kind of change the narrative on that. So how can we make it so that, more people feel like they can actually involve themselves, within these domains, and also in a way that's not just, performative, because we don't want these people to just, post the black square on Instagram and then feel like they've done their job. It requires more than that, and I think that taking that step forward is another thing which is very important, and which is kind of definitive of the way we kind of talk about activism right now. There's a lot of people who only consider it as something which is social media driven. It's a big part of it, but I think it extends that, it goes beyond that, essentially. And I'm sorry for, my English, sometimes it's kind of rusty, but I'm trying to
Nothing you have
manage.
said betrays any unfamiliarity with English. I wouldn't worry about it. No, I understand and agree with you completely. Are you at all familiar with, have you watched South Park?
Kind of. I've seen some episodes, yes.
I feel like, I feel like, oh, actually, I think I know what'll fix the mic issue perfectly, if you don't mind.
Oh, should I do something about it, or
Right,
just...
if you were on push to talk instead of auto activate, because there's no buzz when you're speaking, but your mic immediately returns to default sensitivity when you're not. So if you were on push to talk, then there would be no issue whatsoever. Would you be okay with doing that?
Yeah, hold on, I'll just do that.
Gotcha. Thank you. Anyway, just cleaner audio on all sides.
Actually, I've noticed, if I do
Whatever
here.
that is, that didn't fix it. That did the opposite of fixing it.
Okay, wait, I'll just make push to talk, it's easier.
Anyway, I apologize for the hassle. Mic settings are an ongoing fiddling thing. I can see you have a high quality microphone. It's not the quality of the equipment, just the settings that are tuned to. South Park, it's not a show that I've watched a ton of, but I feel like a lot of the attitudes in that show are indicative of the attitude people have towards social change now, where the worst thing that you can ever do is ask somebody to care. People are really, really, really inherently antagonistic towards the perception of the preachy, over-involved, over-concerned, activist of any kind. And I think that's optically worked pretty poorly for the left, because usually when the right introduces people to their concerns, it's not an affirmative belief that you need to go out there and protest for X or Y. It's this belief that you shouldn't have to care so much about something another group is doing or saying. When people are brought into the right, it's usually not because they're told it's necessary to go storm the Capitol on Jan 6 or whatever. It's because they're told that other groups, the vaunted SJWs, oh, hold on. You're not on push to talk, are you? Because it's still getting a lot of buzz.
I don't wait. I was, but I'm not sure it's actually working. Thing is, I'm on the website because I'm
Oh
not on
God,
my
you're on the website of
setup.
Discord. All right, cut everything.
I'm
Don't even worry about it. Okay, you constructed this connection with sticks and chewing gum. All right, no, it's fine. Don't even worry about it. Um, yeah. Anyway, when a lot of people get brought in, especially back in like the 2014 to 2017 era, a ton of this was just people being mobilized to the right because they were really antagonistic to the idea of having to change their behavior in accordance with changing social standards. The issue is, of course, that if you're left-leaning, you are going to have to ask people to change their behavior, because being left-leaning usually means making an effort to push back against, pernicious social standards. In terms of how to make that, like, optically appealing, in terms of how to make that, cool, I feel like one of the most effective ways of doing this is by taking the same strategy the right has. Don't move forward asking people who are neutral to these issues to change. Move forward by attacking people on the right and showing the ideological consequences of their way of thinking. A person who has never gotten much involved into politics probably isn't going to be like that moved by being told how they need to change like pronoun usage, or their whole idea of gender and sex is, epistemologically constructed in a hegemonically oppressive way. Like, people don't respond to this. Like, some do, but but making fun of like Republicans who want to push trans bathroom bills, or the far right types who are like, clearly proselytizing about these issues. Well, there's your long-term, consequence of not making effective changes, right? Look at how silly they are. And all you have to do, is read up a little bit, and you can avoid sounding like these proselytizing morons. I feel like that's a good way of going forward. You have to be on the attack.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think we're kind of seeing the opposite kind of spring up nowadays too, is like, for maybe 4 years ago, we were seeing SJW cringe compilations, and now we're kind of seeing the almost the opposite, if not, not to the same extent, but it definitely seems like, there's at least some kind of, we're talking back to people who kind of looked upon the movement back then. And, I think these are great suggestions, and to an extent we're kind of putting them in place, so it's a good thing to see, I guess. Definitely.
How do you think? So, how often do you talk to people with whom you disagree with directly in person?
I would say it depends. I have a lot of people with whom I don't necessarily agree, but I know on a daily basis, a lot of my friends, a lot of people I just meet and have a conversation with. I love having debates. The thing is, I'm always trying to find that balance of still finding some kind of middle ground, and it's not something that's easy, especially when I talk with somebody who really has nothing. I would say that is can kind of be compared to the way I'm thinking myself, but I still want to have these discussions, and I think if we need to be, if we need to go hard on them and, ask clashing questions or anything that can be kind of not provocative, but, you put them on the spot, essentially. I think, this is just part of a good debate, of a good conversation. We need to at least be able to openly speak of the things we don't necessarily agree with. Now, I think the standard for, being on the right, like being here in Quebec and, being in America, I don't think is the same at all. So I don't know to what extent I would probably go if I were to talk with a typical American, far right conservative, or, also leftist, anyone who I don't necessarily agree with. But yeah, I guess that's a way to kind of sum it up, if that's clear enough.
Right. Well, obviously there's going to be some cultural dissonance there, though I guess Canada and America, culturally speaking, are probably about as close as any two countries can reasonably be. Um, with regards to how to make this stuff look good, I feel like I see the same patterns emerge in different generations of content, because I remember, for example, that all the like SJW, the ivory tower, white horse bullshit talking points, they were thrown out against Al Gore back in 2000 when he came out with the film An Inconvenient Truth, all the arguments that today people make against SJWs or, woke scolds or whatever else, the same basic line of argumentation is often employed. People who are progressive care about some manner of change, and instead of directly challenging the metrics of that change, or appealing to some kind of meaningful counter-argument. Instead, it's about, oh, look at these busybodies. Oh, they want to, they got their college degrees and they're very progressive and they need you to know it. And they're going to make you pay for it by, making you care about shit that doesn't matter and forcing you to change your behavior, so on. And this happens all the time, and it's happening right now too. And I feel like the best way to avoid this is oftentimes also to have a kind of derisive or comedic attitude. A lot of people on the left kind of come off as stuck up, moral Puritans. Even if they're not, don't get me wrong, like it's okay to be a moral Puritan about a lot of important issues, but like, man, it doesn't hurt to be able to deliver these positions in a way which make people feel, engaged and like, oh, haha, it's all part of the good. If you take a look at how conservatives do their political outreach, it's not super serious and deadpan, right? It's usually pretty, I wouldn't say it's lighthearted, but at the very least, it's like, it's something that you can engage with as a form of entertainment rather than as a form of like exclusively educational self, flagellation. Like, because sometimes the left, it feels like you have to get out this coursework in order to be able to even talk with anybody else. Like, we'll learn all this terminology, learn all that. And it's like, well, okay, well, fuck, how is anyone going to get in on the ground floor of something like this?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's the way you kind of have to always kind of disclose the way you're thinking, or you always have to kind of I guess clarify what are your stances on any kind of issue is definitely a way, a thing that makes it more difficult, I think, to be able to really say what you think quite clearly and openly. Now, kind of relating to that subject, if you don't mind, I kind of want to bring our conversation to another point. Is that fine with you?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, we're talking about, being open about the way we we talk about things or our opinions or anything of that matter. Now, kind of related to the issue, well, the subject of SJW and, social justice movements, I think, is the issue of political correctness. So we've seen a lot of, increasingly, I mean, we've seen companies try to pander to the population by trying to be more diverse, more open, but also by, respecting some terms in both in vocabulary and in the way they were acting. So in a way to kind of make it a safe space and a way for everyone to kind of connect to a certain thing. And I think it's a good thing. The issue is, I think it can be done wrongly, and I'm wondering what you think in that specific set of things. What's your opinion on political correctness as a tool to kind of spread this idea of social justice?
What do you mean by political correctness?
By political correctness, I would mean, well, it's a hard way to describe it, really, but anything that can relate to terminology or certain words that cannot be said or certain words that should be emphasized. I think, do they have a place in everyday life or only in a historical setting? The way people are displayed, even, some people are gonna see two men holding hands in the street and are gonna think that, this is not something that's acceptable. Is it politically correct, or striving to be politically correct, to try to have representation of different groups that don't necessarily make up the majority in what you're doing? Or then does it become performative activism? Or how do we kind of see around this? That's how I would define it, at least.
Yeah, the issue is that I feel like when we talk about political correctness, there are like two distinct blocks that one of which we kind of have to adopt and one of which we really don't. And one of it is this kind of performative niceness where everything has to be couched in language which is non-confrontational and in line with, the most immediate and optimized, like, I guess woke dictionary. And there's nothing wrong with being like that. If you're with certain groups of people or like people who are already very much on your side, like go for it, whatever. It can also lead to a lot of academic specificity, which can be useful in certain types of discussions where everyone is playing on the same field and everyone's acting in good faith. But that's not often the case. But sometimes when people talk about political correctness, what they really mean is just being progressive expressed in language, right? So I don't consider it politically correct to refer to trans women by she, her pronouns, if those are the pronouns that, they go by. I don't consider it like politically correct, for example, to support Black Lives Matter or other issues adjacent to that. Because there's when I think of political correctness, I think of like a particular affect taken towards the delivery of information. But sometimes people, because political correctness has a negative connotation, it's associated with sort of corporate fakeness. They use that term and apply it to essentially anything progressive. But you can't give up that fight, right? I mean, at that point, like, political correctness is just any kind of political affiliation you're not fond of. The right engages in its own form of political correctness nonstop. The right's opposition to Colin Kaepernick kneeling during the national anthem was an explicit form of political correctness, where they took issue not with a message itself, or, well, they did, of course, they pretended not to. Obviously, they hated the whole thing because it was a Black Lives Matter adjacent thing. But the way in which they expressed their criticism was through it essentially not being politically correct enough. It was done during, a time of national celebration, during the Pledge of Allegiance, and that should be like the sacred thing. This is political correctness. They do this all the time. So depending on how you want to throw this terminology around, if anything, the left just has to be better at its own game. The left is too used to speaking only with people who they know agree with them. The left needs to get a lot better at maliciously using terminology that is optically good, if it's effective in pulling people away from the right. Considering the fact that the terminology the right uses, and in fact, really all terminology, is highly malleable. I don't think there's anything inherently dishonest with playing that game, especially if you're doing so within the standards they've set for discourse. If it's political correctness to treat trans women like women, then how is it not, for example, political correctness for you to say that we should never speak out against the police or the military, or et cetera, et cetera? There are always avenues you can attack them back on. It's really just about additional aggressiveness.
Yeah, no, I think kind of, speaking out in a way that will be either equivalent or, trying to not repeat everything they say, in a way that's kind of, because we don't want to, I'm sorry, I'm trying to look for my words here, but we're not trying to imitate them in the way they kind of portray the idea of political correctness, because, I mean, we can kind of use that rhetoric back against them, but I just, I I think there's kind of a debate to have here still, in the sense that, I don't think people are ever going to agree on what really what considers what what consists of political correctness as a whole, because people on the right are always going to use it to kind of bring down things that the left is trying to do, such as Colin Kaepernick, as you mentioned earlier. But then on the other side, we're kind of presenting things which they will also try to dismantle. And so I think, as you said it pretty well, it goes both ways. And trying to kind of decipher what it actually entails, I think it just makes it so that it's, well, harder for one to both identify it and see it as a good thing, because then it can only be used against them. But I think it's something that's necessary to an extent, because, we're also progressing as a society, and without being, a progressive shill like I am, because, I have political opinions like everyone does. Well, I would say that we need we need some of that initiative to an extent to be able to protect these new groups that are, becoming accepted within our society. And this is something we ought to do, but not to the profit of, just making it a check in a box or something.
Right.
Because I feel if we try to make it so that the only purpose is representation, then we're just as bad as if we didn't have anything.
And you want everyone to agree on these issues, right? Take, for example, the belief that slavery is bad, right? That's a hot take. But when we talk about people who have fallen on the slavery is bad side of the discourse, we want everyone to be there. We don't want this to be some, the progressives are in favor of saying slavery is bad. We don't want some situation where it's like, oh, well, the people who understand. No. We want people dogmatically to be against slavery at every level of society, whether they're conservative relative to their time or progressive relative to their time, whether they're edgy or whether their humor and mannerisms are relatively sterile. You want everyone to be on board. And unless you're willing to engage in arguments which can appeal to the broadest possible range of people, you're never going to be able to do that. It's not enough for trans people to be accepted just by the progressive people who are sensitive and in the know. It's something that needs to be understood and accepted by everyone, regardless of their level of education, their general political dispositions, and so on. And that means that you should theoretically have people who are insensitive, edgy, not particularly empathetic, still just generally by default supporting trans people, not because they really care, but because it's just obvious to them. Selling political beliefs as dogmatism is the final stage of winning a culture war. It's something that we've succeeded in doing on some issues, and that's a good thing. This isn't some anti-intellectual process. This is the natural end state of moving past some of the worst ideas humanity ever came about. We, for example, at least in theory, have mostly moved past the idea that the average person is a peasant incapable of determining any, political happenings in their society. Most people, thank God, are opposed to slavery. There are other issues, women's right to vote, for example. Now, there are still people who fight back against these things, of course, but it is certainly taken with some degree of dogmatism by a lot of people, at least to the extent that conservatives can't come out and publicly say they don't want women to be able to vote without having their careers trashed, even with how radical people have gotten these days. The only way to get to that end state, that level of dogmatism, is by expanding the range of argumentation beyond the purview of that, well, SJW aligned hyper progressive discourse. It's one of the reasons why I'm passionate about what I do, because I feel like ideally you should be able to make a person who is very unempathetic agree with arguments in favor of minority groups. Just don't appeal to empathy. Why would that be the only thing you would default to? You should be able to get people who aren't particularly interested in academic social theory to defend the rights of trans people, because most people aren't interested in academic social theory. There are always going to be avenues. Sometimes it's comedy. Sometimes it's the ability to performatively demonstrate rhetorical strength over your opponents by having better arguments. Sometimes it's just, just selling it as the easier thing to believe. But it's always something worth pushing for.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's a good thing we're pushing for it, and we just have to make sure that it doesn't become well, if we go too far off, I think it's going to be hard for, people who are, very more, I would say, resilient to change, or that don't really want that kind of social progress to happen. If we go too far in a certain direction, then I think we're kind of pulling them away more than we're pulling them closer together. So this is definitely an exercise that needs to be done in a way that's, I think steady, but not without going to any extremes either. Because if we have, I think um, going too far in trying to spread these ideas, well, not things like slavery and like woman voting. I think this is something that, should already be a given to everyone. This is not something which we're not, going to accept if people are against that. Where I find the issue is if we're trying to be too brutish in trying to push a certain political agenda. I think that some people who, kind of see it in a way that's more pejorative will have a harder time trying to follow up. And I don't think that necessarily bullying them into thinking that this is something that, this is the new reality grew up, like the future is now old men kind of stuff is like, I don't think this is, well, it's a way to do things, but is it a way which is going to bring people together? I don't, necessarily think so. I think this is something that should be done, in a way that's more. I don't know. I
What's
don't
too
know.
what's too far for you? Give me an example.
Well, and where I'm trying to get at is, if we have a lot of, not resent, but if we have an idea of social justice warriors, which is pejorative, it's because we've seen a lot of, people within these circles of action trying to protest for things that were, kind of too far into progressive territory where it became a joke more than an actual thing to fight for. I'll give you an extreme example, which, it's not even like I don't see how this really applies in any serious way. But for example, the minor attracted people when talking about sexual orientation, this was something where this only gave more talking points for the right to kind of talk about how that progress was demeaning. And I'm not saying that we are kind of going that, like as far as that to kind of promote the agenda.
I feel like that's probably more because of the things they were defending than because of the methods they were employing. The methods that you employ to promote an ideal are essentially ideologically neutral. They can apply to almost anything. I think they were mostly under attack and continue to be and should continue to be under attack for what they were putting forward. But it's about knowing your audience. I'm not saying you should run into a group of, you shouldn't run into a kindergarten class and start bludgeoning everyone who's not familiar with third wave feminist theory, but we need an appropriately diverse range of arguments to employ. And I think it's really obvious that the ones that people on the left tend to fall into really just don't work that well in casual settings. They don't work that well with like schoolmates when you're in class, university, high school, whatever, because a lot of people that age are, well, unempathetic little shits, and they're kind of, edgy, and, they don't care, man, and whatever. That's why there were a lot of people, a lot of guys, who are just kind of by default reactionary when they're around that age, because it seems like the reactionary side is the only side not telling them they have to change their behavior.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is a big part of it too, is like um trying, and I think that you've kind of hit the nail on the head, because trying to change a behavior, we definitely need to mention what's wrong with, having either a certain thought or expressing a certain idea, having some kind of belief which is, very very we would say arriéré, but I'm trying to say it's like, it's far in the past. This is something that, we won't even consider nowadays as a valid opinion under any circumstance. But yeah, I think that, trying to I think we can kind of get these people to take a stance which is more progressive, not by telling, well, we need to tell them what's wrong about it, but in a way that's respectful, and in a way where we can kind of spark that discussion so that they can get a better understanding as to why certain thoughts need to be changed, why certain ideas need to be thought about and restructured in a way that, fits for the current context.
Now, how do you do that? Yeah, have a conversation in a respectful way. Because a lot of conservatives have been exposed to very disrespectful media targeting the groups that, you would be talking about. I keep going back to trans people here because it just seems like an easy talking point to center the discourse around. But there are plenty of other talking points that that come up pretty frequently. But if they've been exposed to the counter arguments, you're the one who's asking them to make a change now. And I feel like oftentimes an appeal to empathy kind of falls flat because the default counter-argument they make is the whole, facts over feelings, reality doesn't care about your, they'll feign sympathy, but it's always that, well, you can't force me to ignore reality by pretending a man can be a woman or whatever. Empathy works for some types, but sometimes other strategies have to be employed, especially comedic ones. Being funny, not being like, super preachy is so incredibly valuable in moving people over.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think I just have this notion that trying to, while not appealing to empathy as just the sole way I'm trying to get people on the other side of thinking, trying to have that respectful place for discussion. And I know I'm repeating the word respectful a lot, but if we don't have that discourse in a way that, isn't meaning to, point a finger at somebody, I think it's a thing we need to do. And it's a thing I also do on, to some extent in some circumstances. But I also think that this is only gonna anger the people on the other side further because well, for most of them, it's hard, especially on the internet, to kind of, think back on what you were doing if somebody comes in, I don't know, says you have a wrong opinion about something. Not in a way that's like too obvious that you're definitely in the wrong, but if you were to say, like, talk about a political opinion, it's really hard to kind of go back on what you said or what you thought and say, well, I was wrong. Practically nobody does that on the internet. And this is kind of something that, well, it's kind of similar in real life, as in, you can have that amount of discussion. So there might be a little bit more of open-mindedness. I'm sorry. But, even then, I think we have to have that discourse without appealing to what they think, but just, in a way so that they don't just see us as the enemy. Because on a number of occasions where I've spoken with people, and I just tried to, not necessarily push my opinions on them, but tell them, why that way of thinking wasn't necessarily good. And I was just, completely blocked, as in, it's kind of like I was talking to a wall. In some of these circumstances, it seems like, kind of being respectful, not in a way where you're pandering to their opinions, but saying, hey, I'm here, and I'm here to have a serious discussion. A lot of people with whom I don't agree with, this was a good way to kind of have a starting point for a conversation. Even though we weren't able to agree on a lot of things, then I can kind of get to talk about the way, about why I think, about a certain thing, or why I want society to progress socially in a certain way. And, at the end of the day, they might disagree with me still, but I feel like that's a better way to have the discussion.
Well,
or
keep in mind that we're talking about, first of all, I'm just saying like a wider range of discussion tactics, but you're distilling that down to disrespectful. I think being comedic and not coming off as preachy is probably the most important thing, which doesn't entail any inherent level of disrespect. But my experience, both personally and in reading up on history, is that unfortunately, respectful conversations with reactionaries, which lead to nobody changing their mind, but at least they don't feel dehumanized, usually lead to absolutely nothing in the long run. Um, the respect is, if anything, a codifying mechanism for you both, because it gives you an avenue to feel secure in your beliefs after having them confronted. You come across and away from those conversations feeling calm and complacent because everyone was kind and respectful, reducing political discourse to just a civil exchange of disagreements, not actually an exchange of power. Now that can be fine for like interpersonal conversations. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we're talking about range of discourse, which can go from just talking to somebody in Facebook DMs or like, having a debate with Ben Shapiro on stage. You can get a wide range of stuff in there, but it's about
Yeah,
understanding, right, what benefits can you get from what you're doing, you know? I think the people who are best at delivering their message are people who come across very cruel and very funny in their attacks against an ideology, but very sympathetic to people who subscribe to that ideology, because that gives people an avenue to recognize the problems with the things they believe without feeling as though they're being personally attacked. And if they're not being personally attacked, that makes their movement to the left afterwards, should it take place, a kind of, they, in a way, it's something they facilitated. You didn't bully them into moving over, they were helped to be made aware of how bad some of the systems they used to believe in were, and then they moved away from it of their own accord, their own decision, and then, of course, they feel more actualized. I think that's generally an effective way of going about things. Attacking right-leaning politicians, right-leaning ideas, making fun of them, mocking them, I think it's great fun. It's good for getting people involved as well, even if they're already politically neutral, because you don't have to agree with a left-leaning person to find a dunk on a right-leaning person compelling, because that goes in the reverse, too. You don't have to be right-leaning to find an SJW's owned compilation super-duper funny. In fact, the fact that those were appealing to basically everyone was one of the reasons why there was a huge uptick in online conservative sentiment around 2014. So it's you have to keep that friendly, or at least neutral middle in mind as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think you have a point, definitely. Um, I think it also depends on the person you're talking to, and it depends of the context you're in. Like I would say, there exists a lot of, people in, the Canadian federal political sphere or provincial level, which, there are people in there who do feel in a way that, is kind of representative of the American neoconservatives or the kind of radical right you'll find. But I find a lot of them are, in a way, they're kind of closer to a level at which you can have this respectful conversation with them. So I think it's also an issue of, being from the United States, where there's a huge problem in the way the government is kind of polarized between one group and the other, and just the nation in general. I feel like in that respect, then yes, trying to bring about this vision of one which, you're trying to push for a change that's more concrete is usually the way to go. And for people who are more understanding of it, then, it's also another way to do things. Now, if I can kind of try to move the conversation to something else, if you didn't have anything else to say on that topic or
Give it a go.
anything that, okay. Well, I had a question that was asked recently for, in the preparing of this conversation about, and, this is going to sound funny because we've kind of talked about it for the entire length of the conversation at this point, but about trans identity. And so the viewer wondered, does more people coming out as trans foreshadow a change in our understanding of gender? So, this kind of relates to what we were trying to say earlier, to what extent are people going to take these, the new identities or the new things that we're trying to promote seriously? But, I think the question in itself is a very good one. So, how would you respond to that?
Which preferred to which?
Um, do you want me to ask the question again? I'm
I didn't
sorry.
fully understand the question. I apologize.
Okay, I'm sorry, my microphone doesn't help either. My setup too. So does more people coming out as trans foreshadow a change in our understanding of gender?
Yeah, I'd say so. It feels like it's pretty irreconcilable at this point, though a lot of it, I imagine, is more due to the media exposure of those trans people than the fact that trans people themselves exist, though that is a recursive process. The more attention is given to the existence of trans people, the more people realize the questions they have about their own identity can be answered with transition or different levels of gender identification or whatever, and that leads to more media attention and so on and so on. I don't know if there's necessarily going to be like a stopgap to that, or like where that point ends necessarily. It seems though that this is pretty it's a pretty unavoidable conclusion that we're going to have to draw. I have no idea how discourse is going to evolve around the increasing prominence of trans people in the coming decades.
Yeah, I think I guess we'll have to see. It depends on, how we bring about this new change, but I'm hopeful that we can make a difference in a way that's positive. We can interact with the population to make it understand that this is an identity which, in the way we try to promote diversity in terms of race, in terms of background, in terms of anything else that might or might not make you different, this is something we need to push for because, as with uh, any other identity, well, uh, that's a kind of a treacherous topic, but I don't think, I think we need to respect the fact that, trans people can definitely identify themselves at what they are because
Well,
it's been proven by science. And I think this is another thing which kind of makes the discussion harder to have is there's a lot of people who will take progressive talking points and bring them down, not because they disagree with it or because they'll show things that kind of go against them, so like sources, science, and like to a certain point religion too. You can be religious, and I think religiosity is not an issue, but for a lot of people when it becomes something that's elementary to their own way of bringing about political opinions, then it kind of shows that this isn't, we're not going to have a discussion that, is going to be on the progressive side
well,
and which,
well,
is more tolerating.
this is the reason why dogmatism is important. If you want these ideas to be accepted, they can't only be believed by people who are especially empathetic, especially well read, or especially sensitive. You need people to believe it just as a matter of course. It's a default thing, People should, and we do this with gay marriage right now. We're seeing it happen right now live with gay marriage. Right now, mainstream federal, election Republican politicians are quiet about their positions on gay marriage. Trump had to virtue signal being in favor of the LGBTQ community, in spite of the fact that, to my knowledge, every single state Republican office has removing gay marriage from making it illegal again on the docket. They all want that to not have it federally allowed anymore. We're seeing the dogmatism take place now. And the reason for that isn't because people are making, civil, well-structured arguments. The reason for that is because people are taking the existence of gay marriage as a matter of course, and if people defy that with their behavior, they get socially shamed. The end goal of progressive politics is not one in which people have to be argued individually into every good position, every affirmative defense of every minority group, but rather one in which people are socially shamed for not already having those takes. That's how things have gone historically, and that's always going to be the easiest way of achieving our goals. Um, the trans situation is going to be no different. It won't be about all of the, point by point arguments about the nuance of identity. It's going to be about, people saying in their Facebook friend group that their kid might be trans and that they think that's gross, and then getting, booted from the group because none of their friends want to talk with them anymore. That's the end goal. The end goal is a thoughtless, aggression towards people who disagree. And anyone who thinks that's bad or like dishonest or whatever, we literally already do that with a ton of old-fashioned like political positions. We already do that with so many things, and the world is better for it, you know? It used to be people believed that rape really wasn't that bad. Marital rape wasn't even illegal until a couple decades ago here in the States. And I'm perfectly okay, personally, with somebody admitting, that they engaged in marital rape being immediately dogpiled by everyone else in their social group. I'm okay with that. I think that's great, actually. I think that's a phenomenal state of affairs. Like Zizek said, they don't want to live in a world in which he has to constantly make an affirmative defense against like the morality of raping people. It should just be taken.
Yeah, no, definitely. And but you make me wonder though. If we're trying to, kind of get a glimpse of the future and tell ourselves, is there any way in which we're going to get to that kind of point at which, it becomes, as you've said, and I'm trying to reach for the same words you did, but I'm not sure I have them, but, this point where non-verbally, if you were to, take a stance on something which, as we've spoken about with a lot of social progress back in the day, which was kind of not taken for granted at first, but then it was kind of assimilated as something which ought to be respected for everyone. If we were to talk about the issues of either first of race and then of, LGBTQ rights, how close would you say we are to that point of being, all being on this kind of same level of understanding and respect?
Oh, it could never happen. It really depends on how things pan out in the future, right? History isn't a gradual path upwards, it snakes and it curves. If there's some big, globally destabilizing force, like say, for example, climate change, social progressivism might take a back seat to other immediate existential issues that people think is of a higher priority. Unfortunately, progressivism is something that's really built on the back of social stability. There are exceptions to that. For example, Rojava, out there in eastern Syria, could be a counterexample that it's possible to implement progressive ideas in a space that is very much not stable. But I think those tend to be the exception more so than the rule. So we have to preserve stability so we can continue to have good conversations like, should we accept LGBT people? And then, of course, the answer to that should be yes. That's the good outcome. As opposed to questions like, should we resort to cannibalism to prevent people from dying of starvation this winter? That would be a bad conversation no matter no matter which answer people pulled out, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to kind of summarize it. And I think I'm hopeful that we can one day reach that level of understanding. I don't know if we're ever gonna if we're ever gonna have it. Well, in terms of, not in every place there seems to be this same understanding as to where we are in terms of acknowledging these rights. And so I think this is something which we will have to see further. I think this is something that's possible here in Quebec, here in Canada, but I don't know for the United States. Again, I'm not from there. I couldn't speak about the way things are in your country, but then again,
right now, the progression of positive advocacy for trans people is proceeding at an incredible rate. Right now, like in the space of about, I think, 8 years, we've gone from the average person having essentially no exposure to them outside of, being the butt of jokes in movies, to the majority of Americans supporting trans people, at least in a milquetoast, Gallup poll kind of way. Not necessarily a, if my kid were trans, I wouldn't freak out kind of way, but it's definitely something.
Sorry, can you repeat that last part? I wasn't able to hear you properly.
Only to say that right now, a majority of Americans support trans people's chosen gender identities. It's not everything, but it's something, and it's zoomed up in like no time at all. I bet you if you could take a poll of like acceptance of trans people's chosen identities from like 2003 or something, I mean, you would get like. I would actually be surprised if you got 10%. I would actually be shocked if 10% of the U.S. population back then would support. They wouldn't even know. They wouldn't even know what that means. Trans person's chosen identity. It might be like 3%, you know, and now it's over 50. That's pretty cool. That's pretty great, I think.
I know we definitely did a lot of good advancement there. So, good job on you guys for actually getting this done. I think it's by, doing this work of, I'm, just, it's kind of spreading the word about it and, making, doing advocacy in general is kind of the way of, getting that message so that everyone can kind of understand it as something which should be a given. And, before trying to segue into our last part where I have just more questions related to you in general, because you've brought some interesting points, but they just don't really relate to what I'm trying to finish talking about here. So if you have no problem
No,
with
of
that,
course. Hit me
maybe
up.
one last question. Yeah, great then. So well, I think we spoke about it earlier, but the issue of tokenism as a whole, how do you see it as, do you think this is something which something that should be reviewed, something which we need to keep, something which, is pejorative in that it kind of brings the legitimacy of the movement or the
Give me an
social justice
example.
movement down? Um, Example. Wait, hold up. Okay, I'm going back to corporate pandering because this is something I see a lot, and I always wonder about the genuinity of these revamps, if you want, or if you will, or of these kind of different initiatives that spring up with the advent of Black History Month or of Pride Month, for example. And I think some of them are legitimate and genuine because they're actually trying to push something which is interesting and could do a difference, whether it be in the specific workplace or for their customers or for anything of that matter, or if it's a public institution, for example. Then again, there's also going to be a lot of corporations or institutions who just, hop on the easy way, I'd say, and just, change the color of their logo to rainbow flag, or, just post a BLM or Black Lives Matter or anything of that matter post in their social medias without actually saying anything which holds significant weight in trying to promote these ideas. It's just, empty words with no promises, with no promise of a feasible change, whether it be in their own community and in their way of doing things, but also outside of it. Because, this is something we need to bring outside of the workplace, outside of where you are, whether it be, at school or work, just, trying to bring these ideas in society in general.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good thing. See, corporations are only ever going to virtue signal. Sometimes you'll see instances of them engaging in meaningful activism, but for the most part, corporations only engage in behavior that will increase the profit share for their shareholders. That's it. That's the only thing they care about. That's what they do. They're machines that make money. And if they think they can make more money by posting a gay flag or a Black Lives Matter poster or whatever, then that's positive for us because it means that the hegemonic support for those issues is great enough that corporations are backing us over the other side. You wouldn't want the opposite to happen, right? Like corporations posting a Confederate flag or a Blue Lives Matter or whatever, even if them doing so didn't amount to any real activism or fundraising for the Confederacy or police brutality or whatever else, the fact that they're doing that at all is a pretty big, optical signal towards their side of things. And in terms of so that's kind of the rainbow capitalism thing. In terms of tokenism, this one's a bit more complicated, but for the most part, from what I've read and from what I've seen and from what I've deduced, the bad elements of tokenism are better than the complete absence of the groups that are depicted, and oftentimes, but not always, the tokenization of certain groups is preferable to their absence entirely. So I'll give an example of this, okay? Black figures in film. For a long time, usually like pre-World War II, in film, the only role that black people got in film was like the maid, you know? Now, this isn't exclusive, of course. There were exceptions, but that was the big thing that they got. Servants. They were servants by and large. In historical pieces, of course, they were often slaves. And even when they weren't, I mean, they were servants, you know, because they were racist as hell. They didn't want to have like some black guy have a meaningful position of power, you know? It was like it was the servile mammy stereotype. I think there was one black woman in particular who was very famous for playing that role. Now, the fact that, they were relegated to those roles is racist. But I gotta wonder, would things have been better if, like, all black people had protested and then they had to get, like, white people to play those roles? Would their absence entirely have been preferable? I don't think so, because the exposure given to these issues through their presence at all ended up being an essential part of the power base that allowed later for them to serve more meaningful roles. So that's good, I often see this get brought up as well with regards to trans people in porn, because oftentimes the depiction of trans people in porn is really, really, really transphobic, though that's been changing recently. Now there's been an effort to include them in a more, positive sense, which I think is great. Not referring to them as slurs or, all derogatory or whatever, but people bring up, are things better or worse for trans people having been given the exposure to begin with? And it's kind of a misleading question because it's not like any one person made that decision. If there's a market for trans people in pornography, it's going to be filled through professional or amateur film. It's not like trans people are going to leave that money on the table when it's there and it exists, and a lot of trans people needed money, which is why so many of them got into sex work, especially back during the 80s, 90s, and early aughts, because they didn't have many other career options relative to other demographic groups because they were so mistreated and because they were fetishized, and it's all so complicated. But the ultimate question is there was it preferable to their non-existence altogether? I don't actually know the answer to that one, because a lot of the harm done to trans people politically was derived from tropes and stereotypes that were popularized or at least reflected in the pornography that was pretty transphobic. The idea that they're tricking men, yada, yada, yada. But then you have kind of blurry lines and stuff like that. Like, what about drawn pornography with trans people, or photo porn or whatever? A lot of that stuff is kind of neutral with regards to tropes. Like, oftentimes it's not even trans people, it's just women with penises, and that's just a thing. But it's not trans people, it's like a whole other archetype. And when you get down to the particulars of it, it seems like problematic depictions of minority groups have a really mixed history in terms of their contribution, positive or negative, to the advancement of those groups' rights. But for the most part, broadly, I think tokenization is preferable to complete non-visibility. That's very much with caveats and exceptions. That's why I'm taking so long to answer. But I think that's the broad pattern. That doesn't mean tokenization's good. It's just like preferable to a worse thing,
Yeah, no, definitely. So it's not ideal, but it's better than nothing still. And we can cherish what we have. Ideally, though, we do better, but it's, at least as you said, it's better than nothing in most cases. So yeah, no, I thank you. Thank you for answering that question. Actually, it was one of the ones I was
My pleasure.
wondering the most about. And yeah, I think I'm pretty much done with my points here, but I still have some other questions if you have the time for it. I don't know how long you still have or anything
I got
of that
some
matter.
time. Yeah, hit me up.
Okay. Well, I'm wondering, because you spoke about the current change in political opinion and the progress of progressive social social prog- progress of social progressive thinking in America, and just how, for example, talking about LGBTQ and trans identity, how we went from 3% of the population openly supporting and understanding
A guess,
their
just a guess
issues.
of mine. It might be even lower.
Okay, well, even lower then. I think it's a question that we can ask ourselves to determine whether or not Well, how is or ideas which kind of go against the grain in that specific regard or in any other kind of regard which is more reactionary or more conservative, we ought to see them decline because of this increasing acceptation of LGBTQ and other communities in terms of diversity such as race and others. But do you think there's going to be this change in balance, for example, in the American political sphere? So are we, one of the greatest questions I have for people in America is, are we going to see Texas switch to being a blue state in the following elections? There seems to be this rise in progressist thinking, especially amongst the youth, amongst the new arrivants, the people who can you compose this new America, which is far more diverse and tolerant of these issues. And it completely goes against things that the GOP or evangelists or any conservative kind of argue for. And there certainly is going to be more of them coming. I'm not saying that what they're gonna do, it's gonna stop to a halt. But are we seeing some kind of progress in spreading these ideas? Do you think this is something that ought to, well, not ought to, but which is taking the United States as of now, I would say?
It's hard to say. I think that there's been a huge surge of support with regards to some issues, but unless we change our tactics or at least adopt them to work more broadly, I feel like we're going to run up against a wall with convincing, a hegemonically sufficient group of people. Having 60% of the country agree with something is not enough. That's not a hegemony. You need like a solid 80 to 90%. There are always going to be holdouts, but I feel like we need to work harder to make this dogmatism. Um, and things that people support dogmatically are things that people will often be quite derisive when arguing for. You know what I mean? Like personally, and this is a philosophy that I take to heart. I feel like people who are arguing reactionary positions deserve my contempt. Not inherently, not as who they are as people, but they're arguing against civil rights. I don't care. If they don't like the contempt, then fine. Maybe they don't remember me as a particularly nice person, but I feel like that degree of social callousness is pretty useful. We believe this past a certain threshold, don't we? Like if a person was running around screaming the N-word, we wouldn't run up and, debate him like civilly. You wouldn't go up and be like, hey, listen, that's like really mean language you're using. You tell him to fuck off, you call him a piece of shit, tell him to kill himself, whatever, have fun with it, be creative. And obviously there are thresholds here, what you can get away with in what situations, but that's the attitude, I think. It's really, really important because we see how quickly Republicans had to fall back off that gay marriage stuff. It was only made federally legal in 2015, a year before Trump won the election. And in spite of that, it was something he felt he couldn't touch. It was accepted. And most people, when they argue for gay marriage, are not busting out arguments that, an academic would use or whatever. They just, call the other person a homophobe or whatever. Just be mean. It's phenomenal, really. It saves a lot of time, too. Much easier to be contemptuous than it is to educate the entire population on compelling social argument. Because, hey, listen, try arguing for gay marriage from, like, epistemics up. Okay, well, why should gay people be able to marry? Because straight people can marry. Okay, so wasn't straight marriage, like, the institution? Isn't marriage about the society, like, promoting some institutions socially in order to facilitate childbirth, and that's why we have tax incentives? Okay, well, aren't there people who don't have children that are still straight couples who can get married? Okay, well, they're, like, the minority, blah, blah, blah. Like, you can run this down, like, forever and ever and ever. Fuck teaching people how to do that on a socially, like, hegemonic level. God no, God no. You just have to teach them to be mean in the right ways, or at least be funny about it.
Yeah, and I think it's an entertaining way of doing things for sure, and in ways where you don't always want to devolve in that kind of debate where you're always even debating the mere consideration of saying something which is remotely progressive, because one thing we see a lot, especially on the right, as you said earlier, is this, this urge to, whenever something is said, just, kind of go against it and just, go totally bonkers and try to repeat every point one after the other in trying to find a way to kind of debunk the argument, because, if you look into it in a way that's too simple, then it's hard to really be left-leaning, because there's a lot of things to consider. And I think for a lot of people, the either right way of thinking, or just not even, the left-right divide, just, being progressive and, not taking that social progress in consideration. I feel like one definitely takes less effort to kind of to get thinking about. And, you could very much say, well, I don't know where I'm going with this, but essentially, it doesn't require as much effort. And so this is something that we can see a lot. So I think this is an interesting point that you're bringing up. Yeah, otherwise than that, I don't really know where to carry on this conversation. If you have anything interesting to say, by the way, nice haircut.
Oh, thank you.
People in the chat are mentioning it, so.
Yeah, they're trying to distract me, but I'm staying strong. No, I don't have much to add. There are interesting topics. I haven't gotten to talk about tokenism in a while. I appreciate you giving me the venue to discuss it.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure, really, and thank you for having me finally after all of that time.
I am so sorry about all of that. You actually are, I think, currently the record holder for the largest number of subsequent delays, etc., etc. It's my fault. I'm very bad at managing my scheduling, and sometimes things tumble down the hill longer than others. Either way, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. And if you have any other thing which you might want to talk about, or anything comes to mind, then I'll definitely come talk to you. I need to improve my English debating and discussion skills for sure. So I'll definitely message you if I have anything else that comes to mind.
Your English is better than the average American's. I wouldn't feel too bad. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Be well.
You too.